I'm sure all of you here have heard or read in the press at various different times that cows are responsible for climate change. The truth is that even if we sort electricity and transport, we're still going to hell in a handcart with climate change because food is such a big issue in terms of biodiversity and climate change. But this is the problem. Now, the problem there isn't the cow that you can see. It's the lack of a blade of grass, the lack of a tree, the fact that all of the nutrition has to be brought in. That's the problem. This is the solution.
The global thinking is if all the pastoral lands in the world were managed to their full potential today, we could reverse global warming in 7 years.
There's a sweet spot where farming and nature come together, where farming is at its most profitable and nature is at its optimum.
We haven't seen a perceptible drop-off in productivity. This discussion has got to be about profitability.
About 7 years ago, I thought to myself that without the single farm payment, we would barely make a profit. This is not sustainable. Look what's happened since the ghastliness of Ukraine.
What the war in Ukraine has showed us is the incredible fragility of the global food system.
What we're trying to do is explain to anybody else who's willing to listen. Here we are in Wales, we grow the best grass in Great Britain. We've got to try and encourage an alternative method of farming so that farming is viable and that people stay on the land.
We're just awaiting the delegates for this conference on regenerative and sustainable farming, and it's something very dear to Davina and my hearts.
About 5 years ago, our art school educated children. They would spurn my food, not because it was terrible, which it usually is, but for largely political reasons. And although I admired their convictions, I felt certain there was another way. And there is. It's called Regen. Farming with nature, carbon farming. The results are essential.
We're going down that route, and it's proved to be, for us, absolutely fantastic. We had to find an alternative, and we've managed to move away from the old traditional system.
Farming systems that we've come accustomed to over the last 50 years really have been sort of induced in a way by payments and subsidies and the drive for more production. It has been economical for us to sort of buy purchase feed and put on fertiliser to get that extra product, but more so now with the higher input costs and maybe some questions over the environmental impacts of those high input systems. People have started to look into sort of other ways of farming, and that's what we've done here. We've changed from a more traditional high input beef and sheep system into a grass-based low input system where there's by now no dependence on artificial fertiliser or purchase feed either. To work with the soil, work with the biology and grow more grass as well. We feel that we've got a lot to learn, and we thought that gathering experts together who are knowledgeable in this department and have done it for themselves, and also getting the local farming community together to a conference like this would be beneficial to everybody.
Speakers have come from far and wide, from Scotland, England, one on Zoom from Canada.
I like Brewster, I'm a regenerative beef and sheep farmer from central Scotland in Perthshire.
I work as the Technical and Business Director at the Farm Carbon Toolkit.
I'm Deputy Director for Land Management Reform in the Welsh Government.
We've got academics, we've got politicians, we've got practitioners, and we've got scientists, so hopefully we tick all the boxes.
And it's particularly important at this moment, of course, because in the Senedd, in the Welsh Parliament, we are actually discussing the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy or creating a brand new sustainable farming scheme for Wales to replace the CAP. And these are very much the kinds of issues that we're deliberating at the moment.
Right, superb, we're operational.
I've come with the mission of making farmers more profitable. The business model that they've been working with over the last 60, 70, 80 years has been wrong, and we can now show why farming with nature is going to be more profitable than substituting for it.
We're in climate crisis.
This is the middle of June. We shouldn't be sitting here today getting battered by a massive big wind. The climate's become so unpredictable, we've got to find a way of building far more resilience into the farming system. We were 100 mils short of rain after the first 3 months of this year.
We have kids, and we know that in many ways we're screwed if we don't get a handle on the situation in terms of climate and biodiversity loss.
If we can start to make this transition, we can really showcase the way that farmers are the ones that can provide that climate solution through managing what's under our feet, through understanding how soils are a key part of it.
To try and use land for multiple outcomes, that we try and produce fantastic, nutritious food, that we use that land to sequester carbon, that we use that land to adapt to the weather impacts of climate change, that we restore biodiversity, and of course, right at the centre of it is soil. It's all about soil. If we can restore the biodiversity in the soil, we restore the biodiversity above land as well.
The fungi and the bacteria work, and the soil food web, that's going to do the job for us.
It's the keystone of life for all of us on this planet, and we jump on it, we piss and we shit on it, and we don't pay an awful lot of attention to it, but if we don't look after it, there is no tomorrow.
There is this kind of classic view, this idea of the three components of soil health, the soil physics, the soil chemistry, the soil biology, that actually how we manage the plants is also really important. It does change the soil chemistry, it changes the soil physics, it changes the soil biology. It is plants. It is this key component, the roots and the root exudates, that is very much driving these below ground interactions.
All of these plants are actually joined together under the soil, and the soils are created by the mycorrhizal fungi. And the mycorrhiza will mobilise and move nutrients between each plant.
It is the microbial contribution that we now beginning to understand makes a very, very important contribution to building soil organic matter.
It's like broadband under the soil. The plant's sitting there watching Netflix, flicking through channels, needing different bits and pieces, and these wee fungi are shooting around, and they increase the root biomass by about 80%.
As livestock farmers, we're using the animal to manage the plants. Modern agriculture grows plants from soil. Regenerative agriculture grows soil from plants.
If we look after the biology will look after everything else for us.
We can transition some of our thinking to more greater diversity, more of these multi-species pastures. It becomes very important how we manage these plants above ground, how we graze them.
With farming as it has been, where, chemicals, all you need is 3 inches of soil, and then everyone's farm behaves roughly the same.
Even though we call ourselves grass-based, we're still quite dependent on inputs, and once we realised that, it made us really question, search more into, maybe the inconvenient truths of agriculture and the system, the amount of energy that it takes to produce food in our old system, and the nutrient density of food is reducing. We're seeing biodiversity decline, we're seeing climate change, and we're kind of a part of that.
Water runoff, soil's going hard, sending a lot of money to town. I just felt like things weren't quite right.
Farming was getting really boring when I relied on people telling me what to do the whole time. The agronomist would come in with a sort of sheet of paper saying, put this fertiliser on that field and spray this one. And we're constantly being sold things we don't need. All the advice is coming from people who've got a vested interest to flog us stuff.
It seems extraordinary that we haven't been focusing more on what's under there, and we've just been focusing on what's in the top centimetre, and then what's on top of it. It's time to get off the hydrocarbon addiction.
We've divorced ourselves from nature as farmers, but now it's time to reconnect. And the wonderful thing is that nature is so resilient. Even after a year or two of applying biologically based methods, the soil starts to recover.
Cattle, they're herding animals, and they congregate together, so they move with each other. If you look back and sort of the plains in America with the buffaloes and bisons and so on, they move together. And this rotational grazing system mimics that really. And getting closer to nature provides what the plant and what the environment needs.
It's predominantly cattle that are driving this system. I regard them as my sort of biological superchargers. That they're tramping through this system, they're creating massive impact, they're opening soils up.
And these cattle here, they're on a grazing rotation. They'd be grazing this paddock for 2 days at a time, and they're ready for their shift now. There are multiple benefits to rotational grazing, not only from a grass yield point of view and grass utilisation. There's no sort of selective grazing, which means that we can develop diversity in the pasture. Also, it allows the grass to reach a taller height. So if on average our pastures are higher, the roots are deeper. And the deeper the roots, the more beneficial it is for soil health in general.
Where I could 2014 dig a divot of soil over and the root depth was 2 or 3 inches. We're now having to dig 2 or 3 feet. Made my farm just bigger. It's great.
That's sequestering carbon. It's managing biodiversity. It's adapting to climate change. It's producing great food. It's making sure the soil works. And it's maintaining jobs and potentially helping to create new jobs in the countryside.
So how do we create an interest and engagement with small-scale farmers who have a lifetime of experience working the land, they know what they're doing, and they don't see any need to change and haven't yet been struck by catastrophe?
We've been on to 150 plus farms. Where change is taking place, it is being driven by the women. That is what we're finding. There's huge peer pressure on the male element of the farming team who goes down the pub or if he goes down the auction mart. The women quite often are doing the books. Women do not have tup or tractor envy. Sometimes as much as 40% of their salary is going in to support an ailing farm business.
The average age of farmers in Wales is 59. And you know, when you get to that age, starting a really radical rethink of your business is quite a difficult pill to swallow when you've been farming just nicely for 30, 40 years.
I think it's change and conservatism and fear is what stops people changing. But I think we're lucky in Wales, we've got quite a few people giving it a go.
The industry as a whole, I do see a change. The elder generation maybe have been farming in a certain way for a number of years, in a way that they enjoy and the way that's worked well for them. So a bit of a challenge maybe for the younger generation. We're working alongside that generation to sort of implement change, but I definitely see progress and I think there will be change.
I think you probably need to maybe reduce stocking numbers and obviously there's a potential knock-on income.
Reducing output is a really scary thing to do.
I think we'll have lesser costs, so which should be profit neutral.
We haven't fed a bag of cake here for 6 years, so that's been an enormous saving.
Now, do you think society will accept what you're saying today?
In the 70s, households spent 30% of their net disposable income on food, and now it's down below 10%. I think we're at the end of the cheap food chapter. Yeah. Let's be honest, it's the dishonestly cheap food chapter, because the real cost of the food we've been eating has been paid for by the NHS or by water companies cleaning up pollution or deferred to our children.
Yeah.
I believe that if you're creating a more resilient, profitable farming sector, you might get cheaper food. Now, you probably don't want to hear that, but the fact of the matter is that if the farming sector is more profitable, you shouldn't need a premium to make it pay.
To improve the biodiversity, to improve the ecosystem, and to produce lots of high nutritional food. I mean, the upside, the potential is so massive. Why wouldn't you have a go?
It's principally about the environment, but very, very close behind is the profit-making potential of your business, and the two have to go hand in glove.
We had 2 years when we made a small loss, which was a bit hairy. Third year we broke even, and the fourth and fifth year, I have to say, from a profit perspective, we're making probably 4 or 5 times more money than we ever made before.
We've got a settled system now. We've come to understand the farm better, sort of the grass growth curve of the farm, and we've got a right balance of stocking rate here. We've come to a position now where it's thriving without the need for any subsidies or government support.
Here we are back at the start. That to me was normal. Mostly a conventional ryegrass mix, a few clovers, tight soils, quite lumpy. May 22, we've got far deeper green starting to appear on the farm now. We've got more nitrogen stored in the soil.
Talking the talk, I want to be able to walk the walk, so I rented a sheep farm which had been kind of neglected really, set stock for 20 years. Aim to convert it to a dairy farm with nothing other than animal impact, grazing 365 days a year, no inputs other than hay, no concentrates, lime, fertiliser, reseeding or chemicals, and the aim to have a comparable profitability to a conventional system. That's the goal, and we're about 1/10 of the way through.
We'd converted 12 years ago or so to a completely no-till system on the arable side, and the results were dramatic, and it didn't cost much, and we made a lot more money than we were before. And I thought, well, this is odd, why isn't everybody doing this? We run a herd of suckler cows, and we haven't used any nitrogen or any wormers or anything really on them for the last few years, and the productivity gets better and better.
Our yields are going up. The health of our crops and livestock, I think, are continuously improving. It's just our farming system is having incredibly positive impacts on nature.
The grass is now kind of so long when I let the cattle in, and the butterflies and the insects that come out, and the birds and the other animals. It's joyous.
My regenerative journey started about 15 years ago, and it started with a crisis. A very, very bad drought that we had on our family farm in Australia that went on for about 3 or 4 years. We'd worked out that the best way to build a resilient, profitable grazing business was to go down this regenerative route. Much lower costs, much healthier animals, a much more resilient ecosystem, and a better business.
Could I ask what the panel think about the business of carbon credits now, which is becoming such a sort of industrialised process? How does that fit into the circle of farming?
You've got to start with soil health and the whole question about how we farm as the first stage, and then the carbon credits, if and when they happen, and when government get their aerial up and try and produce a proper measurement system, an accredited measurement system. That will be a bonus if and when it happens.
2 or 3 years ago, we managed to sell one of the first big soil carbon credit deals in Australia. Over a 3-year period, we were able to demonstrate that across roughly 10,000 acres of grazing land, we'd sequestered 45,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent.
I work professionally in sustainability and on supply chains. Are we missing a trick for those that are already practicing regenerative principles to actually start capturing accurate, meaningful data?
If you're going to change the way you're managing your livestock, start measuring the soil carbon. We just took regular, consistent soil samples across the whole property for about 5 or 6 years. We were able to show what's possible if you get all this right. The most important thing, though, is we managed to collect the data, and so we had the data at our disposal to make sure that we could do this deal.
Okay, we hear a lot about agriculture's ambition to be net zero by 2050. Achieving net zero is going to be difficult, no two ways about it. We as an industry will need those carbon credits ourselves. If we sell them to British Airways, they're gone. Carbon can't be counted twice.
We shouldn't need revenue from ecosystem services to make this work. It's a very nice thing to have on top of building a better business, but we shouldn't need it.
There's a question here, which is where does the government support meet the carbon market and the biodiversity market? What we need to do is to measure farm sustainability from the farm up, and then link that to a labelling scheme which is used by everyone and is transparent. And that way we can avoid the risk of greenwash. And that's why it's so important that the Welsh Government start measuring.
It will look different on every farm. And so that makes comparison really very difficult. What we can do is measure and understand the principles, because if we understand those principles of getting nature to work on our behalf, then we can find the way that that works on our individual farm.
I've been delighted to come along today to talk a little bit more about how measuring greenhouse gas emissions from the farm empowers farmers to be able to have a different conversation and showcase the benefits of some of the environmental things that are coming from their farm.
If we're going to develop a sort of market around it, if we're going to allow people to value the food that we're producing, if we're going to be able to demonstrate the environmental credentials of farming systems here, then we sort of need some numbers on the bottom of it.
It's about ensuring that the taxpayer has some assurance about where the budget is going and the value in terms of the economic and environmental benefits that farmers are delivering for them.
And so we have a large networks of farms that we are measuring on a regular basis through our soil carbon project.
One of the things that would help farmers jump off the cliff and move into more regenerative ways is help with our measurements.
Someone earlier was talking about the importance of risk-taking. We are going to have to try things that are new. You need to monitor the multiple benefits, whether it's clean water, clean air, food, carbon capture. You then can know and share that information.
The Welsh Government should make it a condition upon entering into the scheme that all farmers will have to record their impacts on soil, biodiversity, social, cultural impacts, everything, using this harmonised framework. It can be done, it can be afforded.
Financial support to help people manage transition would be great. Infrastructure, water reticulation systems and fencing.
If you've got vast areas with no fencing and no water, then obviously if you think you've got to subdivide that into sort of paddocks for sort of 2 to 3 day shifts, then it does become more of an investment. If there is sort of government support to help farmers transition, this is certainly one aspect I'd recommend that they invest in.
How can we design these multifunctional agri-ecosystems of the future which do provide ecosystem services but are also productive?
If we go down the ag-tech route of plastic food and petri dishes, we're going to make a lot of people very rich, but we're never going to feed the microbiome, so we're never going to feed the global population well. If we rewild the entire world, well, the entire world never was rewilded in a sort of tree timber sense. Pastoral plants are the most effective tool there is at capturing carbon, at storing carbon, spore paste in the soil.
We're managing the microbiomes in the soils, up through the aggregates, through the microbiomes in the plants, to the microbiomes in the food we feed our animals, and the microbiomes in the animals, and then the microbiomes in ourselves.
Once you see things in a different way, you can't kind of unsee it. If you see a better way of doing it, you're going to grab it. It's a farmer-led revolution, and any historian will tell you all the best revolutions that happened in history have been farmer-led. Farmers are the most sensible people in the country, and anyway, the planet is important, and I think we should all look after it. I'm going to leave it there now. I think it's
It's absolutely fantastic. What an amazing setting and what a brilliant group of farmers and speakers.
What we're seeing is people sharing ideas, and that sparks new thinking.
And maintaining that kind of the dialogue, as I say, between government, between academia and farmers themselves is always a really important thing to do.
This afternoon's conversation I found really inspiring. I would love NRW to be part of a farmer-led movement towards regenerative farming. The sense of possibility is what's needed as we face the existential challenges of climate change and the nature emergency.
Well, what's at stake here, of course, is the future of farming.
If you walk away with even one nugget, that can make a fundamental difference to how you operate your business.
And if 20% of them go away with a new and different view of things and worth thinking it's worth giving it a try, then we've achieved something.